Russia is being massively attacked by drones. Revenge for the Sums is approaching. We can see it. Donald Trump made a series of sensational statements and disclaimed that this is not his war. Will he sell us air defense systems? Petrio? And also Friedrich Merz, who wants to transfer Taurus to Ukraine. Will Europe become a powerful independent player that supports Ukraine and opposes Putin, despite Washington's policy? About this and more right now. Welcome, friends, to my channel. I am Alexander Musienko. Today is Tuesday, April 15th, and for you, a traditional briefing on the news that I consider relevant, important, and worthy of your esteemed attention. So I'll start with the fact that right now, since morning, reports are coming in that drones are actively flying over Russian regions. The Russian Ministry of Defense is already reporting that supposedly 115 drones have been shot down. This is what they are saying as of Nazar's report, that they have already supposedly been shot down, but fires are being recorded and there are strikes on military targets: Kursk region, Voronezh, Moscow, and Oryol. So on Moscow, regardless of the situation, attempts at penetration and attacks continue. Indeed, that's correct, because the enemy needs to understand, and they need to be constantly reminded of our capabilities, our possibilities that exist. Moreover, the enemy must feel that for any terrorist actions, when they strike our civilian cities, where, for example, our people die, and what is worse, to realize, children, when terrorists strike, terrorists must understand that there will be a response. This is the only way it works and no other. And in this direction, undoubtedly, the defense forces of Ukraine will be working and will do everything possible, regardless of the external political situation, which we will certainly discuss now, but they will act to destroy the enemy, so that the adversary understands all the consequences of their aggression. And that they should not have started it, as US President Donald Trump says, that the war would not have started. Yes, the enemy must understand that it would have been better if this war had not been started. Otherwise, those severe consequences that they will face, they will undoubtedly be lower and felt. This regarding the strikes right now. I'll say a bit about the front. And there is already data from British intelligence which assesses that, according to intelligence data, as of only 2025, that is effectively for 3.5 months, they calculated a bit earlier, meaning just over 3 months, Russia has likely suffered about $138,000 casualties, both killed and wounded. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, it lost 920,000. This, according to the analysis directly by the British, citing data from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. It is noted that in March 2025, the number of Russian transfers was 1,300 people per day. The British noted that this figure increased compared to February 2025, when it was about 1,250 daily losses. In fact, however, it remains lower than the very high daily losses at the end of 2024, 1,600 people per day. It was also noted that the increase in the level of losses persists at the beginning of April 2025, which most likely indicates intensified attacks by Russia along the front line. Let me explain a bit. The point is that the losses, which amounted to $2,600 at the end of 2024, as reported by our British partners, are directly related to the fact that the enemy was launching a greater number of attacks and there was a larger number of them. These small groups were the ones conducting and carrying out offensive actions. There was a larger number of the groups themselves, and accordingly they advanced. And the defense forces worked quite actively to inflict maximum traffic. That is, there were more assaults with a larger number of personnel, these small infantry groups accordingly, and the numbers were different. Now, again, when we see it was approximately 1,250, and now we are talking about 1,300. This is indeed, as British intelligence says, related to the fact that the enemy has once again become active along the front line and is conducting offensive actions. Where is it conducting these offensive actions? And where is the main strike possible? The main one. Some have been successfully repelled. A series of attacks directly on the Sumy region, taking all possible measures to prevent the enemy from breaking through into the depths of the Sumy region and directly threatening the regional center. The same applies to the Kharkiv region. That is why the defense forces of Ukraine continue to conduct operations in the Kursk and Belgorod regions of Russia, inflicting losses on the enemy there and taking preventive measures to ensure that Russia does not have more forces and means to invade from here. Plus, as of today, it is indeed recorded that certain enemy groups do not enter the territory of the Sumy region, but they are being destroyed and they are not allowed to establish themselves. And the discussion may rather be about the gray zone than about the occupied territories controlled by Russian troops. The defense and security forces of Ukraine do not allow the enemy to establish a full-fledged regime of control and occupation of these territories. Kharkiv region, the enemy is pressing in the Oskil area. What is all this related to? And this move towards Borova, the fact is that there is an increasing trend that Russia is actually determining a certain direction for its strike in the spring-summer offensive campaign. And likely, this direction of the strike will be Donetsk region, specifically the Lyman direction, with an advance towards the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. That is the northern part of the Donetsk region. That is why there is an intensification in the Oskil area. That is why Russian forces are so eager to cross to the right bank of the Oskil. That is why they are trying to break through there. And Kupiansk is a diversion of our forces on the flank to carry out their offensive operations. Further south, the same applies to the Pokrovska direction in terms of the concentration of attacks. It is evident that this will be. What will these be? The main directions of the strike are the direction towards Sloviansk-Kramatorsk and the direction towards Pokrovsk, or rather not Pokrovsk, but Russia's desire to enter directly into the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region, that is, to cross the border between the Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions, in order to, in their military propaganda, informational psychological operations, claim that, supposedly, look, the flames of war are spreading, Russia is advancing further. It has the corresponding capabilities and so on. Well, this is exclusively used for pressure and as a means of demoralization, sowing panic from the enemy side. This is what the Russian command will focus on for these objectives. As for the southern direction of Zaporizhia and other directions in general, most likely, here I am not asserting, I assume, these will be such secondary directions whose goal is to divert the attention of our defense forces from the main direction of the strike to stretch our forces and thus bind them in other directions not related to the main strike direction, which will be in the Donetsk region. This is the enemy's goal, that they will stretch their presence along the front and create impressions and illusions, attacks along the entire front line. Not the worst scenario for us, because in this way the enemy also cannot fully concentrate that striking force, the power that can move in larger scales and volumes in certain directions. This is important to understand. And while Trump's advisor Burns, who visited Ukraine, who was in Kyiv, in Bucha, and immediately after that, he wrote on the X network that Ukraine needs support, and they are asking for nothing but the weapons that should be provided to Ukraine. So Burns spoke out again, and he said that he was wrong before. Now he believes that supporting Ukraine is also supporting America. First of all, when you see the atrocities committed by the Russians, it's just pure evil. In such moments, politics takes a back seat, noted spiritual advisor Trump Macron Burns. When last month Trump suspended military aid to Ukraine, Pastor Burns supported this decision. Now he is urging Trump to provide Ukraine with more tanks, fighter jets, and air defense systems. The sharp change occurred after Burns' trip to Ukraine, where he personally witnessed the atrocities committed by Russia. Furthermore, Burns said, "I think Putin has reached his limits." He tested Trump's patience, and it seems he has already exhausted it. My support for Ukraine is a pledge to every Republican, every conservative, every American, and those around the world who, like me, have been brainwashed. Fake media about Ukraine. I repeat, the message at the highest levels of government in the USA and around the world is that we must support Ukraine. Russia is the aggressor. Well, this is certainly a very good and correct call from Pastor Burns to every Republican and every conservative. Because in fact, a conservative cannot fail to support those who are fighting for their freedom. A conservative cannot fail to support those who seek a free life in their own country, who seeks to establish the principles of democracy, freedom, the rule of law, and who does not want to move towards totalitarianism, enslavement, destruction, repression, and genocide. A true conservative cannot support such things if he is a genuine ideological conservative, all the more so. A Republican cannot fail to support those who fight for their state, for their right to identity, sovereignty, and existence. But Republicans can be different, and at the head of the USA currently is a representative of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, who, judging by his statements, does not quite share Pastor Burns' opinion. I don't know, maybe in conversations with his spiritual advisor, the US president will change his position. We'll see over time. But for now, this is not very noticeable. Or perhaps Trump hasn't had the chance to read what his pastor wrote on the X network. And maybe this explains the absence of his statements regarding sharing Pastor Burns' position. Because the US president talks about the strike on Sumy being a mistake, without specifying what it is and how it could have happened. At the same time, there is no specificity and no affirmative yes, as of today, from the US president regarding the sale of Patriot systems and missiles to Ukraine, as called for by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In fact, absolutely correct, absolutely clear, a pragmatic approach aimed at tapping into these entrepreneurial talents of Trump and saying, okay, we are ready to buy, we are ready to invest in the American economy, because this is a contribution to the defense industry, to the US defense industrial complex. As it was, by the way, before this, because those expenditures from the US federal budget that went to aid Ukraine, they mostly remained in the US. And specifically, there, they were used for the purchase of weapons, for the production of weapons, and their subsequent supply to Ukraine. Therefore, it is absolutely beneficial from an economic and investment standpoint. But so far, there is no answer. Moreover, Donald Trump said that one should have thought about missiles before the war, before starting a war against a superior enemy. And, in general, Donald Trump is doing everything possible to distance himself now. He says that this is not his war, it's Biden's war. And he accuses the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden, as well as the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, of being at fault. That this war started, that if he were president, again, this war wouldn't have happened. Trump repeats once more. He would have prevented it, but he was the 45th president, and the war was already ongoing. Because Russia began its war against Ukraine in 2014 from the moment of the annexation of Crimea. And Trump was actually providing, or rather selling javelins to Ukraine precisely at the moment when we needed them, to hold back Russia. Perhaps he forgot about this or doesn't want to remember and doesn't want to talk about it. I don't know what the logic is here, but at the same time, yes, the President of the United States is saying that Zelensky's war, Biden's war, they are to blame. But what is Trump doing here and what does it threaten? The fact is that a certain portion of Americans, including Donald Trump's voters, are very quick to pick up on conspiracy theories and various types of conspiratorial versions. And one of the versions is precisely why the war continued. There was possible corruption by President Biden during his presidency. This is what Donald Trump and his supporters used during the election campaign. In particular, they talked about corruption related to relations with Ukraine, support for official Kyiv, and so on. Quite a lot. And now, Trump wants to revive it, hint at it for his voters. And there they are, very actively tracking at the crawl level, as they say. Polls representatives of the Trump administration, Republicans are very actively monitoring how U.S. residents react to various remarks by President Trump, changes in rhetoric, political course, assessment of the situation, and so on. And of course, by tracking this, they try to adjust and assist the president with their statements. And this is bad for us because it creates a background, as if Ukraine was involved in some corrupt dealings, that there was some interest just to irritate Russia, and so on. That's what it is. In other words, Trump tries to equate, and additionally, he blurs. That is, with such statements, the US president blurs responsibility. It should be clearly understood that there is an aggressor, Russia, and there is a victim of aggression, Ukraine. And according to international law, it is absolutely clear who has the right to self-defense plus collective self-defense. According to the UN Charter, it is Ukraine, and who should be condemned and held accountable. What is the right to collective self-defense? It is the ability to defend yourself independently, that's individually, and collectively, it's when you are helped precisely as a victim of aggression. And this is exactly how the United States should act. But we see that there is such a position in Trump. He distances himself as much as possible, but at the same time talks about believing that progress in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine is possible, and soon promises certain news as well. For us, this means that the pendulum may swing in terms of support for Ukraine. It may swing towards creating elements of additional pressure on Ukraine and the Ukrainian government very soon. And that these elements of pressure will be connected and will actually be elements of coercion towards peace. On one hand, Putin, with his terrorist, inhumane, satanic strikes, will try to demoralize the Ukrainian people and break their will to resist. On the other hand, the United States of America, represented by the President of the USA, may take certain steps in order to pressure us now to be ready for painful and unpleasant compromises in settling the war with Russia. This is what is forming. This is what is emerging. Can President Trump change his point of view? Theoretically, I give a small chance that he will change it. Practically, we see this happening. It is going. And this needs to be understood. You know, when I heard President Trump's reaction on board Air Force One, when he was flying from Florida to the airbase, Andrews to Washington, and when he started speaking, commenting on the criminal Russian strike regarding the missile sums, he began once again to continue with the text that millions of people are dying, churches with domes are being destroyed, and so on. What does this mean? It means that in reality he is barely engaging with the updates, the situation updates on Ukraine. He is barely interested in it. This topic tires him. He has some personal grievance. I don't know what it's related to. Probably has this grievance against the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. That's why Trump, in fact, lashed out at the CBS channel, which aired a very good and proper interview with the head of the Ukrainian state, President Zelensky, where there were many clearly and correctly placed accents and arguments, absolutely. But this whole set of factors leads to Trump being more favorable towards Putin for certain reasons. And these are the realities that exist. But now Europe is changing somewhat, because we see that, for example, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas, said that the majority of European Union countries support the idea of transferring long-range missiles to Ukraine, Taurus. This is what the future German Chancellor Friedrich Merz proposed. And this is important. But it is important to understand here that Europe has the chance to truly become a leader, even without the United States, even play a colossal role in ensuring European security, or perhaps not. In other words, the question remains open. For now, we see there are many statements that appeal to Donald Trump. After the Russian terrorist strike on Sumy, the head of the Council of Ministers of Italy, Meloni, stated that the Trump plan should be followed. Polish President Andrzej Duda said that Trump is the only chance for peace, who can put pressure on Putin, but he is more likely to put pressure on Ukraine, on Zelensky, rather than on Putin. French President Macron appeals to Trump. Well, something is starting to quiet down. This information about the coalition of the willing. What's going on there and how it is? Well, we'll see. Europe has a chance. Will it take advantage of it? I hope and believe that it will. Soon we will see, and until then, we hold on. We are strong, and with confidence and God's help, we move only forward. Take care of yourselves. Glory to Ukraine.